Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say as we continue the BBC's coverage of the disaster in Japan. We'll have all the latest on the situation from some of you and from BBC correspondents. There are many questions that you're posting online about the Fukushima nuclear plant. Some of you want to know why it was ever built in an earthquake zone. We have an expert and a spokesperson for the Japanese Prime Minister to give you some answers. And of course, we'll hear the many messages of support that you're sending from around the world. And if you want to take part, the contact details will be on the screen throughout the show. As I was mentioning, the Japanese Prime Minister's spokesperson will be live on World Have Your Say in the next few minutes. You can post questions for him at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. But before we hear from him and from you, let's bring ourselves right up to date with the latest from the BBC newsroom. Japan has declared a state of emergency at another nuclear plant closer to the epicenter of Friday's earthquake. It told the International Atomic Energy Agency that radioactive readings had exceeded permitted levels in the vicinity of the Onagawa plant in the northeast of the country. Japan said the lowest alert level had been reported. This comes as Japan battles a potential second blast at its Fukushima plant, which was badly damaged by the earthquake and by the tsunami. Scientists have been working around the clock to cool reactor number 3 and have even pumped in seawater. There was an explosion at reactor number 1 on Saturday. Cooling systems to both reactors failed after the 8.9 magnitude earthquake struck off the northeast coast. The Prime Minister says it's the worst crisis Japan has faced since the Second World War.
And the tsunami and also the situation concerning the nuclear power stations are perhaps the hardest hardship that we are experienced after the World War II within these 50 years.
There are reports that forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi in Libya have recaptured the eastern town of Brega from rebels after heavy fighting. The rebels have regrouped there after retreating from the oil town of Ras Lanuf. A military source told Libyan state television Brega has been cleansed of armed gangs. Security forces in riot gear fired tear gas to clear the demonstrators from areas around Bahrain's Pearl roundabout, the focal point of weeks of demonstrations on the small Gulf island. The mainly Shiite demonstrations, inspired by uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, have threatened to march on the royal palace of the ruling Sunni dynasty. And one person is reported to have died and another 19 have been injured in Yemen when police fired live rounds and tear gas at protesters in the capital Sana'a. The demonstrators are demanding the end of President Ali Abdullah Saleh's 32-year rule. Witnesses said most of the wounded were suffering from tear gas, but some had been hit by bullets. Protesters have been camped out for days around Sana'a University. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on World Have Your Say. The contact details will be scrolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the programme, so if you'd like to take part, whether by text, on the blog, Facebook, Twitter, or just by calling us up, you're very welcome to. I can see that Adelaide in Ghana just wants to say, I want all Japanese to know that I'll be sending special prayers their way to church this Sunday. Well, let me bring in Noriyuki Shikata, who is the spokesperson for the Japanese Prime Minister. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. Sir, can you hear us okay?
Oh, yes, there was some noise, but now I can hear you.
That's fantastic. We appreciate you joining us at such a busy time. We've got many questions from our viewers and our followers online. Let me begin with one from Edward in Ghana, who wants to ask you, how many people do you now believe died in the tsunami?
Well, it has been very difficult to confirm the number of deaths, and we have confirmed the deaths of over 1,200 and missing over 1,000. But in order to confirm who are missing, we need to get the better information. So it's been a very difficult operations.
And what can you tell us about this latest warning from the IAEA about a second nuclear plant in Japan?
Well, this is a so-called Unit 3 reactor, and what we have been doing is, since this morning, we have been injecting pure water, boric acid, and seawater, and the Unit 3 reactor is now under control.
We appreciate you answering that question. Here is a point from Lauren in Indiana in the United States who says, many of us want to help Japan, but what would you like us to do?
Well, actually, there are some volunteers who try to go to the affected region, but it is very difficult and sometimes dangerous for other people to join those operations along with self-defense forces or police or Coast Guards. And if you're living overseas, what we appreciate is donations to, for example, International Red Cross.
And one more question here from Saju in Pakistan, who says, our hearts and thoughts are with you, but what impact do you think this will have on the Japanese economy?
Well, actually, Prime Minister Khan said at the meeting a few hours ago that this is time to not to be too pessimistic, and we overcome these challenges and we grow again. And so we will try to recover, and there will be new demands created in this process.
And I must ask you a question many of our viewers would like to hear you answer. Do you think it was a mistake to build a plant like Fukushima in an earthquake zone?
Well, actually, for us, nuclear power plant is essential in our energy security policy. And about 30% of electricity is produced through nuclear power plants. And it is difficult to avoid locations which is 100% free from those quakes in Japan.
Do you think it's worth the risk?
Well, of course, this quake was beyond our imagination, but so far we have not seen any critical incidents. And as I mentioned, those two units, unit number 1 and unit number 3, they are under control, and we are taking precautionary measures.
So stay with us if you can. And those of you just turning on BBC World News, our guest is Noriyuki Shikata, spokesperson for the Japanese Prime Minister. He's kindly joining us live to answer your questions. So wherever you are in the world, if you go to facebook.com/world have your say, click the like button and then leave us a comment. I'll get through as many of your questions as I can while the Prime Minister's spokesperson can be with us. But, sir, if you don't mind waiting with us for a couple of minutes, because we can speak to our reporter, Nick Ravenscroft, who's in Sendai, a city in one of the worst affected areas. Nick, tell us a little more about where you are and what you can see.
Well, there seems to be essentially two distinct areas in this city which have been affected. The first is the area down by the waterfront where the tsunami inundated the area there. Shipping containers smashed against buildings, cars, lorries, even train carriages have been flung around. There have been fires in these neighbourhoods as well, large amounts of smoke which can be seen for miles around, power lines down, and yet some distance back you have a city which in some respects doesn't seem to be affected. You have buildings here in Japan which are built to withstand earthquakes, and so the evidence there in the fabric of the roads, in the fabric of the buildings, doesn't seem to suggest that much has happened, and yet there are clear consequences. There are people queuing for food, shortages of food in the shops, as well as shortages of fuel. I think some of this is because people have been stocking up in anticipation of shortages, and thereby making those shortages even worse. But also the fact that because of the transport difficulties, this particular part of Japan is very, very problematic to get around. I think some of the lorries which would normally make these deliveries have just not been able to get through.
And Nick, we've got an email here from Machiko in Tokyo who says our area is supposed to have 3 hours of power cuts on Monday, and indeed we've heard as much from the Japanese Prime Minister today. And he goes on saying we should save this power in order to send it to the north of Japan. But is there concern in Sendai that they'll have to do without power just when they need it most?
Well, it's difficult to say, really. I think the reason for these power cuts is going to be to try and accommodate the shortages caused by these nuclear reactors which have shut down. But you have a difficulty. You have this massive undertaking for the Japanese authorities and the rebuilding effort, which is going to be costing a colossal amount of money. And yet Japan, like many other countries, also has some public debt. And I think the onus will be on the country to try and get back to business as usual at the beginning of the working week. The stock exchange has said that it will be open. The central bank has said that it will do what it can to ensure market stability. I think many ordinary Japanese people will feel that if they are not directly affected by the quake or the tsunami, then it's, in a sense, almost their duty to get back to work, to try and get the wheels in motion, to try and get things back to something approaching normality. And yet that seems in some senses to be a very strange word to even suggest using, normality, when you've had this enormous catastrophic incident, and at the same time the Japanese authorities are having to deal with a potential nuclear incident further south and a big rescue operation, and all of these things are on their plate simultaneously. They'd be tough enough to deal with by themselves, but they're having to deal with them all at the same time.
Nick, many thanks for speaking to us. That's Nick Ravenscroft in Sendai. Now, from the beginning of the programme, our guest today has been Noriyuki Shikata, the Prime Minister's spokesperson in Japan. So let me introduce you to three guests who would like to speak to you. We have Mark in Kitakata, an English teacher normally based in Koriyama City. Here in London, we're joined by Fuzao Ariga, a Japanese tour guide who lives in the UK. And Graham is also joining us from Fukushima. Well, maybe, Fuzao Ariga, we could start with you. What would you like to ask the Prime Minister's spokesperson?
Well, there are many people who have plans to visit Japan in the next few weeks. I was just wondering if you have any advice to them, whether they should stay away from Japan as a whole or continue with their travel plans.
Well, if you have essential, business plans, I don't think there is any need to cancel your trips, except you are planning to visit the Tohoku region, affected areas. But those of us who are living in Tokyo, for example, we do not suffer, from the material difficulties.
And let me read you, sir, an email here from David in Japan who says, I'm disappointed to read of foreign business people who are leaving our country at the first sight of trouble. If you come to Japan to make your living, you have a responsibility to help your hosts in time of crisis. I wonder if you agree with that and whether you disagree with France, who's advising French nationals to leave certain parts of Japan.
As I mentioned, I don't think there is a need for anybody to leave, for example, Tokyo, or to relocate to any other places. And of course, we are tackling the issues in Fukushima, and that is an affected area where you may wish to, if you're a visitor or a temporary resident, you may wish to leave. But otherwise, the rest of the countries is not under enormous difficult situations. Of course, we have to watch out aftershocks.
I appreciate you answering that question. I'm wondering, those of you watching on BBC World News, do you think it's appropriate for those who want to leave Japan at the moment? The phone number is scrolling along the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to call us up. The World Have Your Say team is standing by to take your calls. And we appreciate that question, Fuzao Ariga. We'll come back to you in a moment, but let's shift from London to Fukushima, a place which, of course, is in the centre of the world's attention because of those problems with the nuclear plant. Graham, thank you for joining us. Do you have a question for the Prime Minister's spokesperson?
Yeah, I do. I'm wondering how much use does he think, how much benefit do you think the foreign rescue teams are actually going to be in Japan, given that most of them don't speak Japanese, they're not familiar with the layout of the countryside? Are they going to be actually useful? I mean, I understand there's a great symbolic use, a benefit from having these teams arrive. I mean, I'm from New Zealand, and the Japanese team did some great work in Christchurch recently. But all these teams from different countries arriving into some parts of the coast near here that have been utterly devastated. Is there really much practical use that they can be? I mean, rather than just basically saying, yes, such and such a country has chipped in to help. I'm quite curious on that.
Could you just come up with the kind of simple question?
So the question was really. So the question was: can foreign aid agencies help Japan at the moment?
I see. Well, this is a good question. We have been receiving increasing number of offers from foreign governments, and now more than 70 countries have offered assistance. And we have received rescue teams from South Korea, Singapore, Turkey, Germany, Switzerland, US, and China. And we do appreciate all the offers of rescue teams, including from the United Kingdom. And but it is sometimes difficult for the local community to receive foreign aid workers because of the linguistic difficulties, as was pointed out.
So thank you for answering that question. And as we're hearing you talk and seeing Graham in Fukushima, we can see that footage of the explosion of the reactor 1. There are now concerns about reactor 3 and whether there could be an explosion there. Graham, I just wonder how things are for you in Fukushima. Have you not considered leaving?
Yeah, of course I've considered leaving. It's eerily quiet here. People are really going about their daily lives. They're complaining about the price of shopping and gasoline and whatnot. In some ways, there seems to be very little difference to normal. The big difference is, at the moment, water has been basically cut off throughout the city, although I believe most of the city now has electricity. So, I mean, that's a big benefit. Most people are managing with just, sponge baths and things. Should I leave? Maybe, but it depends who you listen to. The hysterical end of the spectrum will say, "Oh no, it's radiation, we must leave," and whereas the slightly more settled down end of the spectrum will say, "It's radiation that's going to."
Martin, I wonder.
It's a half-life of a second or so, and it's harmless.
Sorry, Graham. I wonder if we could ask the Prime Minister's spokesperson. So, do you think that Graham should leave Fukushima? Is that your advice?
Well, if you are not living very close to the two units of reactors that we were talking about, you do not have to leave the prefecture. And of course, at the end of the day, it is the matter of choice, especially for those people living in Fukushima. But otherwise, I would not interfere with individual choice.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you speaking to us, Graham, and take care in Fukushima. So far on World Have Your Say, we've had calls from Libya, Ghana, India, Nigeria, Gambia, Israel, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Sri Lanka, Iran, and Sierra Leone, and that's just the beginning of the list. Thanks to all of you getting in touch. We'll get to you as many as we can. Sir, just before we quickly go to Mark, who's in Japan, I must ask you a question lots of our viewers want putting to you, and that is, are you telling us everything about what's happening in Fukushima? Is the Japanese government being completely honest about the risk?
Actually, we have been trying to send out as much information as possible, and sometimes even when we don't have conclusive information, we have announced those situations. And this includes a possibility of another blast that took place for Unit 1 yesterday, and there is such a possibility for Unit 3 because of accumulation of hydrogen.
Thank you very much. And Okan was one of those who raised that issue in Nigeria. Okan, if you're watching, did the answer from the Japanese Prime Minister's government spokesman satisfy you? Do let us know. Email worldhaveyourSay@bbc.com. Now, let's bring in Mark in Kitakata, who was an English teacher based in Koriyama City, but he's no longer there. He's shifted. Mark, thank you for speaking to us. Tell us what's happened to you.
We were in Koriyama when the earthquake struck, and obviously it was very tense times there. And I got home just in time to see on the news the tsunami strike. And obviously we're very worried about people in Miyagi Prefecture and in the east of Fukushima Prefecture. And then on top of that, we started having all this news about the nuclear reactors. Mainly, we weren't sure how dangerous the reactors were being. Around the time of the blast was when we decided to move further back from Koriyama, and mainly to help keep our families back home from worrying. We moved as well. Our families have been bombarded with news of the reactors, with news of the tsunami. People think that Fukushima Ken is basically underwater, which it certainly isn't. It's running fine.
Do you imagine a time when you'll go back, Mark?
Probably very soon. We're right now trying to keep abreast of what's going on with the reactors. We're paying very close attention to the news, and I'd just like to thank Noriyuki-san for talking to us about this. It's very tense times, but I feel like the Japanese government is keeping us as informed as they can be. I know there's a lot of international media talking about very dangerous things going on with the reactors, which seems a bit less optimistic than the Japanese government is. I'm sure it's somewhere in between as to how the real situation is.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Take care as well. You're saying you're approving of the information coming from the Japanese government. Some of you are getting in touch doubting whether you're getting good information. Well, we have the spokesperson for the Japanese Prime Minister. He's decided to come on to World Have Your Say and take your questions. So if you have doubts about what you're being told, this is your opportunity to ask specific questions. Do call us up on country code 44 2070 83 72 72 or go to facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Noriyuki Shikata is the Prime Minister's spokesperson. Here's another question for you, sir, from Jackie in Tokyo, who says the problem with the nuclear meltdowns is the way it's being reported. The media is deliberately scaring people. Do you think that's true?
I do not call the current situation as a meltdown, and I kind of agree to that perspective that there should not be excessively pessimistic viewpoints being presented, and we have to take precautionary measures. And in the case of Unit 1 and Unit 3, there was a blast. Well, Unit 1, there was a blast, but this has not damaged the reactor itself. So there's no need to excessively worry about the situation.
Let me say in a moment we're going to speak to a spokesperson from the Red Cross, but I must ask you quickly this question just in on text from Kwazi, watching us in Ghana, who wants to ask you, when this has all been, when Japan has recovered from this disaster, will you build in the areas which have been badly affected?
That's a good question, and I don't have an immediate answer to that. And obviously, we are learning precious lessons from these tragic experiences. At the same time, in terms of our energy security policy, it is important for us to have nuclear power plants in Japan.
Thank you for answering that question. It's striking how many of you, particularly in West Africa, are getting in touch saying Japan should consider about migrating whole groups of people away from the danger areas. Eda in Nigeria has just made that point, but lots of you are making similar points. OK, let's bring in another guest now. Sayaka Matsumoto is a spokesperson for the Japanese Red Cross and speaks to us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us. What can you tell us about the work that you're able to do and the people that you can't reach at the moment?
Well, thank you for having me. And Japanese Red Cross has mobilized more than 80 medical teams, and some of them have started to support the local hospitals who's receiving the patients. And some of the medical team has put up the tent clinics beside the evacuation centers, and others are doing a mobile clinic to serve the people affected.
And in your view, do you think the estimate of in the region of 10,000 people being missing is accurate?
Well, we haven't been able to get the information by ourselves from that city. As far as I've been watching the national broadcast, the water has swallowed that town. Like the water level was up to the 4th level of the building, so it is very difficult to find the people alive to go in there because there's so much debris.
We appreciate you speaking to us. Do stay with us for the second edition of World Have Your Say. If you can, you'll have seen on your screens there more astonishing and terrible footage of towns in the northeast of Japan which have been completely wiped out. Many thanks to Noriyuki Shikasa, Japan's Prime Minister's spokesperson. He may be staying across into World Have Your Say second edition if you would like to continue your comments, and you can carry on the debate either way at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Speak to you in a minute. Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say as we continue the BBC's coverage of the disaster in Japan. We're going to have all the latest on the situation from some of you and from BBC correspondents. There are many questions that you're posting online about the Fukushima nuclear plant. Some of you indeed want to know why it was ever built in an earthquake zone. Well, we've got an earthquake expert and a spokesperson for the Japanese Prime Minister to give you some answers. And of course, we'll hear the many messages of support that you're sending from around the world. And if you want to take part, the contact details will be on the screen throughout the show. We've had calls from 35 different countries during the first edition of World Have Your Say. Thank you very much indeed for joining me for the second edition. Many of you just want to send your best wishes to Japan. Bashir in Nigeria says, "My sympathies are with you. May God help them." Well, before we continue to talk about what's happening there, let's get the latest from the BBC newsroom. Japan has declared a state of emergency at another nuclear power plant closer to the epicentre of Friday's earthquake. It told the International Atomic Energy Agency that radioactive readings had exceeded permitted levels in the vicinity of the Onagawa plant in the northeast of the country. Japan said the lowest alert level had been reported. This comes as Japan battles a potential second blast at its Fukushima plant, which was badly damaged by the earthquake and by the tsunami. Scientists have been working around the clock to cool reactor number 3 and have even pumped in seawater. There was an explosion at reactor number 1 on Saturday. Cooling systems to both reactors failed after the 8.9 magnitude quake struck off the northeast coast. The Prime Minister says it's the worst crisis Japan has faced since the Second World War.
And the tsunami and also the situation concerning the nuclear power stations are perhaps the hardest hardship that we are experienced after the World War II within these 50 years.
In other news, there are reports that forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi in Libya have recaptured the eastern town of Brega from rebels after heavy fighting. The rebels had regrouped there after retreating from the oil town of Ras Lanuf. A military source told Libyan state television Brega has been cleansed of army gangs. Security forces in riot gear fired tear gas to clear the demonstrators from areas around Bahrain's Pearl roundabout, which has been the focal point of weeks of demonstrations on the small Gulf island. The mainly Shiite demonstrators, inspired by uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, have threatened to march on the royal palace of the ruling Sunni dynasty. And one person is reported to have died and another 19 have been injured in Yemen when police fired live rounds and tear gas at protesters in Sana'a. The demonstrators are demanding the end of President Ali Abdullah Saleh's 32-year rule. Witnesses said most of the wounded were suffering from tear gas, but some had been hit by bullets. Protesters have been camped out for days around Sana'a University. Well, thank you very much indeed for your company on today's World Have Your Say. If you want to phone up and take part, we're of course talking about the disaster in Japan. You may have comments, questions or experiences that you want to share. If you're online, facebook.com/World Have Your Say is where to go. If you'd like to speak with all of our guests, you can call us up live. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Now, in a moment, we're going to go back to the Prime Minister's spokesperson in Japan. But first of all, let's bring in Sayaka Matsumoto, a spokesperson for the Japanese Red Cross in Tokyo. And I've got a question for you here from Jasmine in Singapore, who says, is there one coordinating organisation helping the relief effort in Japan? And if there isn't, I think there should be. Could you respond to that?
Okay, the search and rescue and the relief operations are coordinated by the local government in the affected area, and the Japanese Red Cross is also coordinating with them. And the Disaster Management Operations Center is set up in the Sendai, which is the capital city of the Miyagi Prefecture. The prefectural buildings of that city, of that prefecture, is a little bit damaged, but it's still okay. So our colleagues, our team members are working in that building and coordinating with the government authority, the police, and the infrastructure companies. So there is a coordination body.
Thank you very much indeed for responding to that. Jasmine, thanks for watching and for getting in touch from Singapore. That was Sayaka Matsumoto from the Japanese Cross in Tokyo. Let's bring in again Noriyuki Shikata, the Japanese Prime Minister's spokesperson. Sir, I'm just seeing that the US State Department is urging all non-essential government personnel to defer travel. It's also saying Americans should avoid tourism and other unnecessary visits to Japan. Do you think that's the right advice?
Each country has the right to decide what is appropriate under the current situation. Of course, if we are talking about people going to the affected areas, that is going to cause lots of problems. So that's something we would not want to see unless there is engagement in rescue activities with respective governments.
And I'm sure there are people watching us right now who have journeys planned to Japan. Will you still be making those journeys, or are you cancelling them? Do let us know. What have you say at bbc.com, or you can phone us on the number scrolling along the bottom of the screen. Let's bring in Fuzo Arika, who's a Japanese tour guide who lives in London. I wonder whether you would recommend people take their holidays in Japan at the moment.
Well, I'm currently talking to clients, and I'm asking them to monitor closely what their governments are recommending, as well as looking at updates of what's actually happening on the ground in Japan. It's difficult. One of my clients was going to Sendai, and of course he cancelled that, and we're making alternative arrangements for him. But it's difficult to see, because this is still an ongoing situation, I think, and the coming weeks we'll see how it unfolds.
Thank you very much for responding to that. Noriyuki Shikata, I have to return to a subject we talked to you about a little earlier, because so many of our viewers are raising this. Krishna in India says, why did you ever build sensitive structures like nuclear plants in vulnerable and coastal areas? Chris is watching in Oman and says, why did you ever build these massive cities in earthquake zones? What do you say to our viewers who are asking those kind of questions?
Well, I have already mentioned that it is essential for the Japanese energy security policy to have some degree of nuclear power. And, for example, we import almost 90% of oil from Middle Eastern countries. And we need to have a better energy mix.
Thank you very much indeed for responding to that. Japan's meteorological agency has just lifted all tsunami warnings for the country's Pacific coast. That's reported on NHK television. Sir, here is a question from Kenji in Dubai for you, who wants to ask whether there'll be an economic tsunami as Japan cuts off funds to poorer countries, which it assists at the moment.
Well, our foreign aid program is something that is on its own, and we wish to continue those programs. We need to be attentive, to the needs in the developing countries while we are suffering inside. So I don't think we will cut off our aid to those countries, especially suffering from poverty and health conditions and so forth.
Kenji, if you're still watching in Dubai, let us know if that's put your mind at rest. You can tweet us at BBC_World, have your say. OK, let me pull up an email that's come in from Martin in Saitama. He says, there's no gasoline now in our area. Some heating oil is available for kerosene heaters, which is good, especially if electricity fails. I guess no petrol means no deliveries. And, sir, Mr. Shikata, how are you going to keep the aid effort working when you've got problems with the amount of petrol you have and problems with the amount of electricity you have?
We do have some the real issues of electricity in Tohoku and Kanto area, possibly in Tokyo too. So we have to work on those issues, especially with regard to electricity. But as far as gas or petrols are concerned, I don't think there is macro problems. We do not see any shortages as a country at this point in time.
Thank you very much indeed for answering that query. I can see a couple of messages here from Blue Java, who says, our local gas station here in Yokohama is limiting cars to 20 litres. Store shelves are half empty, lights are low. And Gennaro is in Tokyo saying, my family has bought me a flight out of Tokyo on Tuesday. I'd feel guilty about leaving others behind without lending a hand, but like in Haiti, it would mean one less mouth to feed. Let's bring in Walt Patterson, who's a nuclear physicist at Chatham House, because really, Mr. Patterson, the concerns about the nuclear plant are number one amongst our viewers. How concerned are you?
Well, I'm not sure that that should be the number one concern for the people in the area because of the devastation they've already suffered from the earthquake and the tsunami. That's obviously top priority, but the nuclear issue has clearly got to be dealt with.
When you say dealt with, isn't to some extent this out of the authorities' hands? They're having to respond to a situation which is to some extent out of their control.
Well, I don't think at the moment it's out of their control, but it's certainly it's certainly stretching them. They're all I know, of course, is what's being reported, and what's being reported so far is at least moderately reassuring. They seem to have still been able to keep things to a considerable extent under control. They've obviously had some major fuel damage at the first unit at Fukushima, and apparently, I would say now, quite significant fuel damage at Unit 3, and I gather they're now having some trouble at Unit 2 as well, all of which is not very good news. But so far, at least, there hasn't been any significant breach of any of the reactor containments, and that as long as they can keep it to that extent, then the public health implications will be minor compared to what compared to the devastation that's already been wreaked. And that's what they're trying to do, of course.
And Walt Patterson, as I'm talking to you, we can see footage of the explosion on Saturday that took place. And Walt Patterson, we have the Prime Minister's spokesperson on the phone from Japan. I wonder if you've got a question you would like to ask him about how these various difficulties are being dealt with.
I'd like to ask, what has happened to the control room at the unit at Unit 1? Is the control room after the explosion? Is the control room itself intact? Is the communication between the control room and the reactor still functioning? Do they know in the control room what's going on in the reactor?
Mr. Shikata?
Well, this is something which is a bit technical for me to answer. Frankly speaking, what I can tell you is that after checking the outcomes of what we have found out is that after the blast, there has not been any damage to the reactor itself, and we have been confirming that the integrity of the primary containment vessel of Unit 1 remains intact.
Yes, I understand that, but that doesn't say anything about the status of the control room or about communication between the control room and the intact reactor. Because unless you actually have still got dials and gauges and sensors that are telling you what's going on inside the reactor, you're working in the dark. You don't actually know what you're dealing with in the way of covering of the fuel or uncovering of the fuel or temperatures or pressures or anything.
Well, this is, as I said, this is the issue, somewhat technical for me to answer, and I do not have a definitive answer to your question.
And Mr. Patterson, maybe I could ask you a question I've been asking Mr. Shikata for the duration of the programme, because so many of our viewers are putting this point. Was it irresponsible to put a nuclear power plant in that place on the coast?
I gather that a senior Japanese seismologist has said exactly that. He's quoted in today's Observer newspaper in the UK to the effect that he advised the authorities at the time that this was not a good place to be putting plants as sensitive as nuclear plants close to an active earthquake fault. It does seem to me to be a very dubious proposition, but the difficulty faced by the Japanese is that there are very few parts of Japan that are not close to earthquake faults.
Thank you very much for joining us. That's Walt Patterson with us from Chatham House in London. If you want to call up, best to do it sooner rather than later, because we're on air for a few more minutes. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. You can speak to anyone on the programme. It's always the same on World Have Your Say, whether on television or radio. Whenever you're watching or listening, you are welcome to take part. Mark in Australia has called us, and I'll speak to you in a moment, Mark. But first of all, Dennis is in Sendai, a major city of 1 million people that was very badly affected by the tsunami. Dennis, first of all, are you okay?
I'm okay at the moment, yes.
That's very good to hear. Tell us about your experience.
Well, there was an earthquake on Wednesday. That was my first ever earthquake I experienced. I was a bit shook by that, but there was no structural damage. Everything was okay. Friday's one was just unbelievable. My house swayed like from side to side for a good 4 or 5 minutes. Came outside my house. There's the roof of the house opposite the road had fallen down. Everybody was panicking. There was no electricity. Nobody knew what was happening. I knew, okay, that it was bigger than Wednesday's earthquake, but I didn't know how severe it was.
And how have the past 48 hours been?
Well, from Saturday evening, my part of the city got electricity. So that was a blessing. We got to find out, contact our families back home. Also, we got to find out the true extent of the actual earthquake. We saw the horrific images of the coast and the tsunami. Because before, okay, all the information that we got was basically through MMS. And also, Saturday, there was hardly any shops open. So there wasn't that much food available. As I said, Saturday evening, electricity came to our part of the city. And so today, a lot more shops have opened, but it's a kind of a queuing system, one in, one out. And the queues, okay, have the queues are like for quite a couple of blocks. Yeah. And there's hardly any food left. Shelves are empty. They're kind of rationing.
Well, Dennis, you're talking about there not being enough food and that food supplies are running down. And we have the government, the Prime Minister's spokesperson, Noriyuki Shikata, with us. So I know you have to go, but just quickly, what guarantees can you give to people like Dennis in Sendai that you'll be able to get them the food they may need in the next few days?
Well, we realized that there are real issues or problems associated with provisions of food in some areas. And we are stepping up efforts to increase food supply. And we are hoping that this problem will be resolved not far in the future.
Sir, thank you very much for joining us. I know you need to go now. That's Noriyuki Shikata, the spokesperson for Japan's Prime Minister. Many thanks to him for joining us. And Dennis in Sendai, take care and do stay in touch with us if you can. If you're just turning on and haven't seen World Have Your Say before, it's a radio programme, a television programme and a discussion online. We're here on BBC World News, also on BBC World Service Radio. But the place where we're always open for business is online. You can get us at worldhaveyoursay.com, or if you go to facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay, click like, and you can join the conversation as it continues with thousands of people all around the world talking about the issues that they care about. Now, Mark was watching us in Australia and called in. Hi, Mark. What's your point?
I'm quite angry, actually. My family is in Japan at the moment, and it's absolutely amazing to me that you have a country where an earthquake is a completely expected event, a tsunami is a completely expected event, and yet at the first sight of these things happening, the nuclear facilities fail. I want to know who's been negligent here, who's going to be accountable here, and what's the government going to do about it. Of course, now is not the time for blame, but it's obvious that someone's been criminally negligent here in constructing these facilities that obviously can't cope.
For one moment, Mark, this was the strongest earthquake it's believed Japan's experienced in 1,200 years. It's hard to prepare for something on that scale.
Well, it sounds to me like it's not the strength of the earthquake only. I think it's the fact that there was an earthquake and that there was a tsunami combined, and I'm not sure that it's the fact that it was the strongest earthquake in 100 years or whatever that's caused it. There obviously has been insufficient planning for backup. There just aren't enough backups.
Well, I wonder if everyone else watching agrees with your frustrations. Mark, thank you very much indeed for calling us. Maybe we could bring in Fuzo Ariga, Japanese tour guide living in London. Do you agree with Mark's anger, or is he being a little unreasonable?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is the biggest earthquake that they've had in memory. I'm a bit reluctant to jump in on the anger wagon. I think we need to kind of wait and see the bigger picture a bit longer.
But nonetheless, does Japan need to stop and say, actually, it makes no sense to have large cities, it makes no sense to have nuclear plants in places which may well experience strong earthquakes again?
Well, earlier, the specialist physicist, as he pointed out, most of Japan is in an area that is exposed to earthquakes. Do you then say, do you deny a country from having this source of power? I don't know if you can ask that. What's the alternative sort of power, energy consumption direction? I'm not saying I'm for nuclear power or anything like that, but I think you can't just blanket deny the option.
Thank you very much for responding. Deacons in Nigeria saying, I think it's time for the Japanese authorities to realise that their land is an endangered zone for human inhabitation. They need to think about negotiating migration plans. That's a message from Nigeria. Let's shift from West Africa to Dubai. Krishanta has called us here on BBC World News. Hi, Krishanta. Welcome to World Have Your Say. What's your point? Krishanta, can you hear us okay? Doesn't sound like it. We'll try and clear that up. Let's speak to Mark in Qatar, who's also phoned in. Mark, what's your point? Oh, hold on. I'm getting mixed messages here. Let's speak to Mark in Japan, who is on Skype. Mark, welcome to the programme.
Hi there.
I apologise. I was shifting you to various different countries there. What's your view of whether Japan needs to consider where its people live and what facilities it puts in earthquake zones?
I think it's very interesting people talking about migration. Japan was built by earthquakes, basically. It lies on earthquake faults. The whole country suffers earthquakes on a regular basis. I've been through numerous earthquakes here, and by and large, they're very small. By and large, they don't interfere with your day. People just feel them and ignore them. Something of this magnitude, people are talking about 1,200 years. This is the biggest one they've had. You can prepare for earthquakes. We've had earthquake preparation here. We have evacuation zones and safety zones. We are extremely well prepared. Japan is the best country to be caught in this kind of disaster. But the scale of this disaster, it's impossible to prepare for that. They're doing the best they can, it seems. From my own experience, that's what they're doing, but it's just too big.
Have you managed to speak to your pupils, Mark?
I haven't, no. And it was particularly poignant on that day because that was graduation for the 15-year-olds at school. It was supposed to be a very happy day for them. I haven't been able to contact them. As far as I know, the majority of people in my city are fine. There was very little relative damage where I am, and Koriyama is actually an evacuation zone for a lot of the eastern part of Fukushima Prefecture.
Thanks for speaking to us, and do take care. That's Mark in Japan. I can see that some of you in Thailand, Spain, France, Turkey and the Netherlands have got in touch. Many thanks. I've got a question here for you, Fuzo Riga. This is from Navraz in Kathmandu. He says, considering your country's wealth, do you really need any help from abroad?
I think, of course, you need help. There's lots of technical aspects to rescue that I think Japan, the last time they had the big earthquake in the Kobe earthquake, there was some question of not utilizing the help that was offered from around the world, and I think they shouldn't make that mistake. And it's not a question of just having the wealth, but you need to get everyone involved from all over the world, especially when they have this technical expertise in rescue.
Thank you for responding to that point. Let's quickly speak to Krishanta in Dubai, whose line we've sorted out. Krishanta, quickly, what was your point?
To my sister.
We're listening, Krishanta.
Hello?
We're listening.
Her name is Lalani.
Krishanta, I'm not understanding what you're saying, and with only 30 seconds left, I'm not sure I'm going to have a chance to sort that out. Hopefully we can speak to you again, though, on a slightly clearer line, and maybe when we're both understanding each other. Thank you very much indeed to everyone who's taken part, especially to Fuzo Ariga, who's been with us for both editions of the programme, and also our special guest, Nariyuki Shikata, the Japanese Prime Minister's spokesperson. You can carry on the debate online, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. But to all of you who've watched and who've contributed, thanks very much. I'll speak to you on BBC Radio on Monday. Goodbye.